What if the Tower of Babel was actually completed? Hey there and welcome back. Tonight we're going somewhere quiet, somewhere slow. We're not rushing toward any grand revelation or racing through dramatic what-ifs. Instead, we're simply going to settle in, take a breath, and imagine something together. Something soft, something patient. What if the Tower of Babel was actually completed? Not as a story of rebellion or divine punishment, but as a slow, methodical human achievement. A structure built brick by brick, generation after generation, until one day it simply stood there, finished, under an endless sky. No confusion of languages, no scattering of peoples, just completion, just continuity. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this kind of thoughtful, relaxing exploration, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you'd like more content like this, consider subscribing. But only if it feels right. No pressure. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's always wonderful to know who's joining us on these quiet journeys. Now maybe dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background. Get comfortable. Because tonight we're not just telling a story. We're imagining a world. A calmer world. A world where humanity spoke one language, built one tower, and never stopped understanding each other. Let's ease into it together. A city without confusion. Imagine waking up in an ancient city somewhere in the flat plains of Mesopotamia. The sun is just beginning to rise, casting long golden light across mud brick homes and narrow streets. The air smells of baking bread and river water. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the steady rhythm of hammers against stone, the soft shuffle of workers' feet, the low murmur of voices all speaking the same language. This is not Babylon as we know it from the biblical account. This is a different place. A place where the Tower of Babel was never interrupted. Where the great project continued year after year, decade after decade, until it became not a monument to pride, but simply a fact of life. A structure so woven into the fabric of the city that people barely remembered a time before it. In this world, there was no sudden confusion. No moment when neighbor could no longer understand neighbor. No scattering across the earth in bewilderment and fear. Instead, there was only the steady continuation of work. The passing of tools from father to son, from mother to daughter. The slow accumulation of skill and knowledge, all shared in a single tongue. The morning begins as it always does. Women rise first, lighting small clay lamps and stirring the embers in their hearths. They prepare a simple breakfast of barley porridge, seasoned with a bit of onion or garlic, perhaps a drizzle of sesame oil. Bread is torn and shared. Beer, thick and nourishing, is poured into clay cups. Prayers are whispered to the gods, thanking them for another day, another meal, another sunrise. The men stretch and prepare for the day's labor. Some are farmers who will walk out to the fields beyond the city walls, where irrigation channels carry water from the great rivers to rows of wheat and barley. Others are artisans, potters, weavers, metalworkers, each with their own workshop, their own rhythm, their own craft passed down through generations. And then there are the builders, the ones who work on the tower. Even now, centuries into the project, the tower is not yet finished. But it's close. So close that people can almost imagine what it will be like when the final brick is laid, when the final ramp is dismantled, when the structure simply stands, complete and unchanging, against the sky. The tower is made of mud bricks, each one shaped by hand, dried in the sun, then baked in kilns to harden them against the elements. The bricks are laid with bitumen, a sticky black tar that oozes from the ground in certain places, providing a waterproof seal between each layer. Slow work, tedious work, but it's work that connects every generation to the one that came before. There's a rhythm to it, a cadence. Lift the brick, place it, press it down, smooth the bitumen, move to the next. Repeat, 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 day after day, year after year. In this world, no one is in a hurry. There's no sense of urgency, no race against time or divine intervention. The tower will be finished when it's finished. And if it takes another generation, so be it. The work itself has become a kind of meditation, a shared ritual that binds the community together. You see, in a world where language never fractured, the tower is not a symbol of human arrogance. It's a symbol of human patience, human cooperation, human continuity. It's a reminder that great things are not built in a day or even in a lifetime. They're built slowly, carefully, with the understanding that the work you do today might not be appreciated until long after you're gone. And yet you do it anyway. Because that's what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. The tower is a slow achievement. Let's talk about time for a moment. Specifically, let's talk about how long it would take to build something like the Tower of Babel if it were never interrupted. Based on what we know about ancient Mesopotamian construction, particularly the great ziggurats that dotted the landscape, we can make some educated guesses. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, for example, was built around 2100 BCE and required an estimated 700,000 bricks. It took years to complete, and that was with the full backing of a powerful king and a large workforce. The Tower of Babel, as described in Genesis, was meant to reach the heavens. Let's interpret that not as literal infinity, but as a structure taller and more ambitious than anything that had come before. Perhaps 7 or 8 levels, each one smaller than the last, creating that distinctive stepped pyramid shape we associate with ziggurats. Such a structure might require millions of bricks, and each brick had to be made by hand. Clay was dug from the riverbanks, mixed with water and straw to give it strength, then pressed into wooden molds and left to dry in the sun for days. Once dry, the bricks were stacked in kilns and baked at high temperatures, a process that required constant attention and a steady supply of fuel. Then came the actual construction. Bricks were carried up ramps, which had to be extended and reinforced as the tower grew taller. Bitumen was heated and spread between each layer. Workers had to be fed, housed, and organized. Tools had to be made and maintained. Injuries had to be treated. Disputes had to be settled. In short, building the tower was not just a construction project. It was an entire economy, an entire way of life. And in this alternate history, it continued without interruption. Generation after generation contributed to the work. Grandparents told stories of when the tower was only 3 levels high. Parents spoke of the year the 4th level was completed. Children grew up playing in the shadow of the tower, dreaming of the day they would be old enough to carry bricks themselves. There was no single architect, no grand visionary whose plan everyone followed. Instead, the tower grew organically, shaped by the collective decisions of countless workers, builders, and planners over centuries. A decision made in one generation might be adjusted by the next. A mistake in alignment might be corrected 100 years later. The tower was not perfect. It was human. And that was part of its beauty. Most workers never saw the top. They spent their entire lives working on a single level, or even a single section of a level. They knew that the completion of the tower would come long after they were gone. And yet they worked with care, with pride, with the knowledge that their labor mattered, even if they would never see the final result. Imagine that. Imagine spending your entire life working on something you know you'll never see finished. Not out of obligation, but out of a quiet understanding that some things are worth doing simply because they connect you to those who came before and those who will come after. There's a peacefulness in that, don't you think? Daily life among the builders. Let's step closer now. Let's look at the people who built this tower. Not as abstract figures or nameless laborers, but as individuals with routines, relationships, and quiet moments of their own. Take a man named Shamash, for example. A fictional name, yes, but a common one in ancient Mesopotamia, often given in honor of the sun god. Shamash wakes before dawn as he has every day for the past 20 years. He's a brickmaker, a skilled craftsman who knows exactly how much straw to mix with the clay to make bricks that won't crack in the kiln. His hands are calloused and scarred from years of work. His back aches when the weather is cold. But he takes pride in his craft. He knows that the bricks he makes today will still be standing centuries from now, long after his name is forgotten. And that's enough. Shamash's wife, Ninsun, is a weaver. She spends her days at a loom, creating cloth from wool and linen. She hums as she works, old songs her grandmother taught her, songs about the rivers and the harvests and the gods who watch over the city. Her hands move with practiced ease, the shuttle flying back and forth, thread by thread, row by row. They have 2 children. A boy named Enkidu, who is learning his father's trade, and a girl named Inanna, who helps her mother at the loom. In the evenings they eat together, a simple meal of bread, onions, and beer. They talk about the day's work, about neighbors and friends, about small joys and small worries. After the meal, they might sit outside their home, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The tower looms in the distance, its massive bulk silhouetted against the fading light. It's so much a part of their lives that they barely notice it anymore. But sometimes, on clear nights, Enkidu will ask, "Father, do you think we'll see it finished in our lifetime?" And Shamash will smile and say, "Maybe, maybe not. But we'll keep building anyway." This is daily life in a city where the tower continues. It's not dramatic. It's not filled with miracles or disasters. Simply life. Steady, predictable, and quietly meaningful. Workers gather at the base of the tower each morning. There's no need for a foreman to shout orders. Everyone knows their task. Some mix mortar. Some carry bricks. Some work on the ramps, ensuring they're strong enough to support the weight of workers and materials. Others carve decorative elements into the finished surfaces, patterns of spirals and stars and waves that ripple across the brick like frozen water. There's a rhythm to the work. A kind of music in the sound of hammers and chisels, the scrape of brick against brick, the soft murmur of voices sharing instructions or jokes or complaints about the heat. At midday, work stops. Everyone gathers in the shade, sitting in small groups to eat and rest. Bread is passed around. Beer is shared. Stories are told. A young worker might ask an older one about the early days of the tower, and the older worker will lean back, squinting at the sun, and begin to tell a story his grandfather told him, about the very first brick, the very first day. These stories are important. They're how the community remembers itself. How it passes down not just techniques but meaning. The tower is more than stone and bitumen. It's memory. It's connection. It's the physical embodiment of everything the people value: patience, cooperation, continuity. And in the afternoons, as the sun begins to sink toward the horizon, work resumes. Slower now, more careful. Everyone is tired, but no one complains. This is the work. This is what they do. And there's a kind of peace in that certainty. Language as the foundation. Now, let's think about what makes all of this possible. What allows this slow, multi-generational project to continue without interruption? What keeps the community unified, even as centuries pass and the world around them changes? The answer, of course, is language. In the biblical account, God confuses the languages of the people building the Tower of Babel, causing them to scatter across the earth. But in our alternate history, this never happens. Language remains unified. And because of that, knowledge, tradition, and meaning flow smoothly from one generation to the next. Imagine the implications of this. Imagine a world where, for centuries, everyone speaks the same language. Where a child in Mesopotamia can understand the stories told by an elder, without any barrier of translation or interpretation. Where technical knowledge about brick-making, irrigation, astronomy, and agriculture can be passed down with perfect clarity, accumulating layer upon layer like the tower itself. In our world, language diversity has been one of the defining features of human history. According to modern estimates, there are between 6,000 and 8,000 languages spoken today, each one a unique window into a particular culture, a particular way of seeing the world. This diversity is beautiful and valuable. It allows for creativity, innovation, and different approaches to the same problems. But it also creates barriers, misunderstandings, difficulties in communication. When two people speak different languages, they must either learn each other's tongue, or rely on translators, or find some other way to bridge the gap. And even then, something is often lost in translation. Nuances of meaning, cultural references, the music and rhythm of the original words. In a world with a unified language, these barriers don't exist. At least not in the same way. Communication is direct, immediate, effortless. When a worker on the tower needs to explain a technique to a younger apprentice, the words flow easily. There's no struggle to find the right term, no confusion about what's being asked. This doesn't mean that everyone thinks the same way. Far from it. Even within a single language, there are endless possibilities for creativity, debate, and different perspectives. But the foundation is shared. The basic structure of communication is stable. And that stability allows for a different kind of progress. Let's think about how ideas spread in this world. In our history, when a new technology or concept emerges in one culture, it often takes years or even centuries to reach another culture, in part because of language barriers. Translators must be found. Texts must be painstakingly copied and adapted. Meanings must be interpreted and reinterpreted. But in a world where everyone speaks the same language, ideas spread more smoothly. Not necessarily faster. There are still limits of geography and travel, but more evenly. A farmer in one village who discovers a better way to irrigate his fields can share that knowledge with a farmer in another village, and the instructions will be understood exactly as intended. Over time, this creates a kind of collective knowledge base. A shared library of techniques, stories, and wisdom that everyone can access and contribute to. The tower itself becomes a symbol of this shared knowledge. Each brick represents not just physical labor, but intellectual and cultural continuity. Of course, there are trade-offs. In our world, linguistic diversity has driven innovation. When people from different cultures come together, they bring different perspectives, different ways of solving problems. The friction and misunderstanding that arise from language barriers can actually spark creativity, forcing people to find new ways to communicate and collaborate. In a world with a unified language, that particular kind of friction doesn't exist. Change happens more slowly. Traditions are less likely to be disrupted. There's a stability, a predictability that can be comforting, but also limiting. So which is better? A world of many languages, with all the creativity and complexity that brings? Or a world of one language with all the clarity and continuity that offers? There's no easy answer. And perhaps that's the point. In imagining a world where the Tower of Babel was completed, we're not trying to argue for one outcome over the other. We're simply exploring what that world might feel like. What might be gained. What might be lost. The tower's true purpose. As the centuries pass and the tower slowly rises, something interesting begins to happen. The original purpose of the tower, whatever that might have been, begins to fade from memory. New purposes emerge, shaped by the needs and desires of each generation. In the biblical account, the tower is built so that the people can make a name for themselves, and so that they won't be scattered over the face of the whole earth. It's an act of pride, of defiance, of human ambition reaching toward the divine. But in our alternate history, where the tower is actually completed, the motivation is less clear. And perhaps that's appropriate. Because when a project spans multiple generations, the original intent often becomes less important than the meaning it acquires along the way. Maybe, in the beginning, the tower was meant to be a temple. A place where priests could ascend to perform rituals, to commune with the gods, to observe the movements of the stars. The ancient Mesopotamians were skilled astronomers. They tracked the paths of the planets, predicted eclipses, and organized their calendars around celestial events. A tall structure would have been ideal for such observations. But as the tower grows, it takes on other functions. It becomes a marker of time. Families measure their lives by its progress. I was born the year they completed the 5th level, someone might say. Or, my grandfather helped lay the foundation of the 3rd level. He's been gone for 40 years now, but his work is still there, solid and strong. The tower becomes a meeting place. Merchants gather at its base to trade goods. Farmers bring their produce to sell. Artisans set up stalls, offering pottery, cloth, jewelry, and tools. Children play in the wide plazas, chasing each other and laughing. At certain times of the year, the tower becomes the site of festivals. People climb the long, winding ramps to the various levels, where priests perform ceremonies and offerings are made to the gods. There's music and dancing, feasting and celebration. The tower, so often associated with labor and effort, becomes a place of joy. And then there are the quieter moments. Individuals who climb the tower alone, not for any religious or practical reason, but simply to see the world from a higher vantage point. From the top of the tower, the city spreads out below like a mosaic. Fields of wheat and barley stretch toward the horizon. The rivers glint in the sunlight. And above, the sky is vast and endless. It's a humbling sight. A reminder of how small any individual life is, how brief and fragile. And yet, also a reminder of what's possible when people work together, slowly and patiently, toward a common goal. Over time, the tower stops being about reaching the heavens. It becomes about the journey, about the process of building, about the connections forged between workers, between generations, between the present and the past. And when the final brick is laid, when the tower is at last complete, there's no great celebration, no divine acknowledgement, just a quiet sense of satisfaction, of completion. The workers stand back, look at what they've made, and think, we did this, together. And then life continues, because the tower was never really the point. The point was always the building of cultural continuity. Let's pause for a moment and think about what cultural continuity means in a world where language never fractured and the Tower of Babel was completed. In our world, human cultures are incredibly diverse. Each culture has its own myths, its own rituals, its own way of organizing society. This diversity arises in part from the fact that human populations have been separated by geography, language, and history. Isolated groups develop their own traditions, which then evolve independently over time. But in a world where everyone speaks the same language and a major unifying project like the tower continues for centuries, cultural continuity looks different. Traditions spread more easily. Stories are told in the same words, generation after generation. There's less drift, less mutation. This has both advantages and disadvantages. On one hand, it means that knowledge is preserved more accurately. A technique for making better bricks, or a story about the origins of the city, or a religious ritual, all of these can be passed down with remarkable fidelity. There's less room for misunderstanding or reinterpretation. What the grandparents knew, the grandchildren also know, almost exactly as it was taught. This creates a deep sense of rootedness. People feel connected to their ancestors in a very tangible way. They work with the same tools, tell the same stories, worship the same gods in the same words. There's a kind of timelessness to it, a feeling that the past and present are not so different. On the other hand, it also means that change happens more slowly. Innovation is less common. New ideas are viewed with suspicion. After all, if the old ways have worked for centuries, why change them? In our world, cultural evolution has been driven by contact between different groups. When two cultures meet, they exchange ideas, technologies, and practices. This can lead to conflict, but it can also lead to synthesis, to the creation of something new and valuable. In a world with a unified language and a strong sense of cultural continuity, such exchanges are rarer. Not because people are isolated, far from it, but because the culture itself is so stable, so self-reinforcing, that there's less pressure to adopt new ways. Think about the stories people tell in this world. In our history, myths and legends change as they're passed from one culture to another. A story that begins in one region might be transformed beyond recognition by the time it reaches another region, adapted to fit the local context, the local values, the local language. But in a world where language is unified, stories travel intact. A myth about the creation of the world, or the deeds of a hero, or the love between a goddess and a mortal. These stories are told in the same words with the same details wherever you go. They become part of a shared cultural inheritance, a common reference point that everyone understands. This has a unifying effect. People feel part of something larger than their own city or village. They're connected to everyone else who speaks the same language, who tells the same stories, who worships the same gods. There's a sense of shared identity that transcends geography. But it also means there's less diversity of thought, fewer alternative narratives, fewer voices questioning the established order. In our world, cultural diversity has been a source of resilience. When one culture faces a challenge, other cultures might have developed solutions that can be adapted and adopted. But in a world with less diversity, everyone faces the same challenges in the same way. There's less experimentation, less innovation. Again, we're not saying one is better than the other. We're simply observing the trade-offs. A world with cultural continuity is more stable, more predictable, more unified. But it's also less dynamic, less adaptable, less creative. A civilization built on shared tradition. Let's imagine what daily religious life looks like in this world. Religion was central to ancient Mesopotamian society. The gods were not distant or abstract. They were active participants in human affairs, responsible for everything from the fertility of the fields to the outcome of battles. In our world, as human populations spread and languages diversified, so did religious practices. The same God might be worshipped under different names in different regions. Rituals might be performed differently. Myths might be told with different emphases or details. But in a world where language never fractured, religious practice remains more consistent. The god Marduk, for example, is worshipped in the same way throughout the land. The prayers are the same. The offerings are the same. The festivals are celebrated on the same days with the same rituals in every city and village. This creates a powerful sense of shared identity. When people gather at the tower for a major festival, they're not just coming from different places, they're coming with the same expectations, the same understanding of what the festival means, the same songs and prayers. Imagine standing in the great plaza at the base of the tower, surrounded by thousands of people, all singing the same hymn in the same language. The sound is overwhelming, a wall of voices rising up toward the sky. You can feel the vibrations in your chest, in your bones. And you know that your ancestors sang these same words, in this same place generations ago. And your children will sing them in the future. There's a kind of power in that. A sense of permanence and continuity that gives life meaning. You're part of something that was here before you and will be here after you. Your individual life is brief, but the tradition continues. Priests play an important role in maintaining this continuity. They're the ones who memorize the prayers and rituals, who ensure that everything is done correctly. They're the keepers of tradition, the link between the present and the past. But in this world, priests are not the only keepers of tradition. Everyone participates. Farmers know the prayers to say before planting and harvesting. Parents teach their children the old stories. Workers on the tower sing hymns as they labor, the rhythms of the songs matching the rhythms of their work. This creates a society where religion is not separate from daily life. It's woven into everything. Every meal begins with a prayer. Every major decision is made with reference to the will of the gods. Every success is attributed to divine favor, and every failure to divine displeasure. In our modern world, we might find this stifling. We value individual freedom, the right to question, to doubt, to choose our own beliefs. But in this world, such freedom is not valued. Or rather, it's not even conceived of. The idea that you might not believe in the gods or might worship them differently simply doesn't make sense. It would be like questioning the existence of the sun or the rivers. And yet, there's a kind of comfort in this certainty. In our world, we often feel unmoored, uncertain about the meaning of life, about what comes after death, about whether our actions matter. But in this world, these questions have clear answers, provided by tradition. You know your place. You know your purpose. You know that if you live a good life, honoring the gods and fulfilling your duties, you'll be rewarded. And if you don't, you'll be punished. It's not a world that encourages questioning or innovation, But it's a world that provides stability and meaning. And for most people that's enough. The tower is calendar and clock. One of the most practical functions the tower comes to serve is as a kind of calendar. A marker of time. A way of organizing the rhythms of life. Think about it. In a world without clocks or written calendars, how do you keep track of time? How do you know when to plant and when to harvest? When to celebrate festivals and when to perform rituals? The ancient Mesopotamians, like many ancient cultures, used celestial observations. They tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets. They knew that certain stars appeared at certain times of year, and they used this knowledge to organize their calendars. The tower, with its height and prominence, becomes an ideal observation platform. Priests and astronomers climb to the top to watch the sky, noting the positions of celestial bodies, predicting eclipses, and marking the solstices and equinoxes. But the tower also serves as a calendar in a more immediate sense. As the tower rises, level by level, it becomes a way of marking the passage of time. People remember events not by years, but by the progress of the tower. That drought? That was during the building of the 4th level. My daughter was married the year they finished the western ramp to the 6th level. The tower becomes a shared timeline, a physical embodiment of history. And because everyone participates in its construction, everyone shares this sense of time. There's no need for abstract dates or numbers. The tower itself is the calendar. This has a profound psychological effect. It makes time feel tangible, solid. You can point to a specific brick and say, "I laid that brick the day my son was born." You can stand at the base of the tower and look up, seeing not just the structure, but the accumulated labor of your entire community stretching back generations. It's a reminder that time is not just an abstract concept. It's something that's built, layer by layer, moment by moment. And your life, brief as it is, contributes to that building. Completion. And then one day, after centuries of work, the tower is finished. There's no dramatic moment. No fanfare. No divine intervention. Just a day like any other, when the last brick is laid, the last bit of bitumen smoothed into place, and the workers step back and realize, it's done. For a moment, there's silence. The workers look at each other, unsure of what to say. What do you say when something that's defined your entire life, your parents' lives, your grandparents' lives, is suddenly complete? Someone laughs. A short, surprised laugh. And then others join in, and soon the whole site is filled with laughter and cheering. Not because the tower is beautiful or perfect. It's not. It's rough in places, uneven in others, marked by the countless small decisions and adjustments made over the years. But it's finished. And that's enough. Word spreads quickly through the city. People leave their homes, their workshops, their fields, and come to see. They gather at the base of the tower, craning their necks to look up at the full structure for the first time. It's taller than anyone imagined. Taller than any building has a right to be. And yet it stands, solid and strong, a testament to human patience and cooperation. In the days that follow, there's a sense of, what? Not emptiness exactly, but perhaps a kind of quiet disorientation. For so long, the tower has been a constant presence, always unfinished, always under construction. And now it's simply there. Complete. Unchanging. Workers who spent their entire lives on the tower find themselves at loose ends. What do you do when your life's work is finished? Some move on to other projects. Some retire, content to spend their remaining years telling stories about the building of the tower. Others simply stand at the base, looking up, remembering. But life, as always, continues. The tower becomes part of the landscape, no longer something being built, but something that simply is. People still climb it, especially during festivals. Priests still perform rituals at the top. But the daily work, the constant presence of construction, is gone. In a way, the completion of the tower marks the end of an era. The era of the tower's building. And like all endings, it's bittersweet. But it's also a beginning. Because now the community must find new ways to define itself, new projects to undertake, new goals to pursue. The tower will always be there, a reminder of what's possible when people work together. But it's no longer the center of life. And perhaps that's as it should be. Because the tower was never really about the tower. It was about the people who built it, the connections they forged, the traditions they maintained, the language they shared. And those things continue even after the tower is complete. A world slightly different. Let's step back now and think about what the world might look like in the centuries and millennia following the completion of the tower. How does this world differ from ours? First, and most obviously, there's the matter of language. In our world, languages have diversified dramatically over time. The Indo-European language family, which includes English, Spanish, Hindi, Russian, and many others, is believed to have originated from a single proto-language spoken perhaps 6,000 years ago. Since then, it has branched and diversified into hundreds of distinct languages. But in a world where the Tower of Babel was completed, this diversification never happens. Or at least it happens much more slowly. The shared language of the tower builders remains the dominant language for centuries, perhaps even millennia. Dialects emerge, of course. People in different regions develop slightly different pronunciations, slightly different vocabularies, but the core language remains mutually intelligible. This has profound effects on the spread of ideas and technologies. In our world, the development of writing systems was crucial for preserving and transmitting knowledge. But different cultures developed different writing systems. Cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphs in Egypt, characters in China. And these systems were not mutually intelligible. In a world with a unified language, a single writing system might spread more widely and persist longer. Knowledge recorded in one region can be easily read and understood in another. There's less need for translation, less risk of information being lost or distorted in the process of transmission. This creates a kind of shared intellectual tradition. Philosophers, astronomers, mathematicians, and historians all work within the same linguistic framework, building on each other's ideas with less friction. Progress in one field can more easily inform progress in another. But there are also downsides. In our world, linguistic diversity has been a driver of creativity and innovation. Different languages encode different ways of thinking about the world. For example, some languages have elaborate systems for describing spatial relationships, while others have complex systems for describing time or social hierarchies. These differences reflect and reinforce different cultural priorities and ways of understanding the world. In a world with a unified language, this kind of linguistic diversity is much reduced. There's one dominant way of thinking about the world, encoded in the structure of the language. This can lead to a certain kind of intellectual homogeneity, a narrowing of perspectives. Cultural traditions also evolve differently. In our world, when different cultures come into contact, they exchange ideas, technologies, and practices. This can lead to conflict, but it can also lead to synthesis and innovation. New religions, new art forms, new political systems emerge from the interaction of different cultural traditions. In a world where cultural traditions are more stable and unified, this kind of cross-cultural exchange is less common. Traditions are passed down largely unchanged, generation after generation. There's a deep respect for the past, a sense that the old ways are the best ways. This creates a society that values continuity over change, stability over innovation. It's not that new ideas never emerge. They do, but they're viewed with suspicion and must prove their value before being widely adopted. Trade and commerce might also look different. In our world, trade has been a major driver of cultural exchange and innovation. Merchants traveling between different regions not only exchanged goods, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Language barriers could be an obstacle, but they could also be a source of opportunity, as merchants who could speak multiple languages became valuable intermediaries. In a world with a unified language, trade is smoother in some ways. There's no language barrier to overcome, but perhaps less dynamic. Without the friction of cultural difference, there's less pressure to adapt and innovate. Politically, a unified language might lead to larger, more stable empires. In our world, empires often struggle to govern diverse populations speaking different languages and practicing different customs. Communication was difficult, and regional identities often led to resistance and rebellion. In a world where everyone speaks the same language, governance is easier in some ways. Laws and decrees can be communicated clearly to all parts of the empire. There's a shared cultural identity that helps bind the empire together. But this can also lead to more centralized, more authoritarian forms of government, as there are fewer checks on centralized power. The modern world in this timeline. Now let's take a leap forward. Let's imagine what the modern world might look like in this alternate timeline. What would today be like if the Tower of Babel had been completed and language had never fractured? It's difficult to say with certainty, of course. So much of history depends on contingency, on chance events and individual decisions. But we can make some educated guesses based on the patterns we've discussed. First, language. In our world, linguistic diversity is vast but shrinking. According to estimates, a language dies approximately every 2 weeks as speakers shift to more dominant languages like English, Mandarin, or Spanish. In a few generations, many of the world's 7,000 languages may be gone. In the alternate timeline we're imagining, this process started much earlier and went much further. Perhaps there's still one dominant language, or perhaps that language has fragmented into a family of related languages, but far fewer than the thousands that exist in our world. Someone from one region might speak a dialect that sounds quite different from someone from another region, but they can still understand each other with relatively little difficulty. This has interesting implications for global communication. In our world, the internet and global media have made English something of a lingua franca, a common language that people from different linguistic backgrounds use to communicate. But there's still a digital divide, where people who don't speak English or other major languages are cut off from much of the global conversation. In the alternate timeline, this divide is less pronounced. There's still inequality, still differences in access to technology and education, but language itself is less of a barrier. Information spreads more evenly. Someone in a remote village can access the same knowledge as someone in a major city, as long as they can read and write. Education might look different too. In our world, children often spend years learning multiple languages, especially if they live in multilingual societies. In the alternate timeline, there's less need for this. Children learn to read and write in the common language, and that's sufficient for most purposes. This frees up time and resources for other subjects: mathematics, science, history, art. But there's a flip side. In our world, learning multiple languages has cognitive benefits. It improves memory, enhances problem-solving skills, and fosters cultural empathy. Bilingual and multilingual individuals often have a more flexible, more creative way of thinking. In a world where most people speak only one language, these benefits are lost. Culturally, the alternate timeline might be more homogeneous. In our world, globalization has led to a tension between homogenization and resistance. On one hand, global media, brands, and cultural products spread everywhere, creating a kind of global monoculture. On the other hand, local cultures resist this homogenization, asserting their unique identities through language, tradition, and art. In the alternate timeline, this tension might be less pronounced. There's already a shared cultural foundation, built over millennia. Local variations exist, of course. Different regions have different cuisines, different music, different customs. But these variations are like dialects of a common language, rather than entirely separate traditions. This could make the world feel more unified, more connected. Conflicts based on cultural misunderstanding might be less common. People from different regions might find it easier to empathize with each other, to see themselves as part of a common humanity. But it could also make the world feel flatter, less interesting. In our world, cultural diversity is a source of richness and beauty. Traveling to a different country, you encounter different foods, different music, different ways of life. In the alternate timeline, these differences are more subtle. travel might feel less like exploration and more like visiting a slightly different version of home. Technologically, it's hard to say how the alternate timeline might differ. Some historians argue that conflict and competition drive innovation, and that a more unified world might be less innovative. Others argue that cooperation and the free flow of information are more important for technological progress, and that a world with fewer barriers to communication might be more innovative. Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. The alternate timeline might see steadier, more incremental technological progress, but fewer revolutionary breakthroughs. Inventions and discoveries spread more evenly, but there's less of the creative friction that comes from different cultures approaching the same problems in different ways. Politically, the alternate timeline might be characterized by larger, more stable political units. In our world, nation-states are often defined by language and culture. Borders are drawn along linguistic lines, and minority populations often struggle for recognition and rights within larger states. In the alternate timeline with less linguistic diversity, borders might be drawn differently. Perhaps there are fewer larger states, each encompassing a wider territory. Or perhaps there's a stronger sense of global governance, a recognition that all people share a common language and, by extension, a common destiny. But this unity could also be dangerous. In our world, diversity acts as a kind of safeguard against tyranny. When power is distributed among many different linguistic and cultural groups, it's harder for any one group to dominate completely. But in a more unified world, the concentration of power is easier, and the potential for abuse is greater. Imagine a world government, for example, empowered by the fact that everyone speaks the same language and shares similar cultural values. Such a government could do great good coordinating global responses to challenges like climate change, pandemics, or poverty. But it could also become oppressive, enforcing conformity and suppressing dissent. The question of innovation. Let's linger on the question of innovation for a moment, because it's central to understanding how this alternate timeline might differ from ours. In our world, innovation often arises from necessity. People facing different challenges in different environments with different resources come up with different solutions. Over time, these solutions spread, are adapted, and contribute to a growing body of knowledge. Linguistic and cultural diversity play a role in this process. Different languages encode different ways of thinking. Different cultures have different values and priorities. When these diverse perspectives come into contact, they can spark new ideas, new approaches, new breakthroughs. For example, the scientific revolution in Europe was fueled in part by the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Islamic texts, which had preserved and extended knowledge that had been lost in Europe during the Middle Ages. The encounter with these different intellectual traditions challenged European scholars to rethink their assumptions and develop new theories. Similarly, many technological innovations have arisen from the exchange of ideas between different cultures. Paper, printing, gunpowder, all of these originated in China and spread westward, where they were adapted and improved. The compass, the astrolabe, algebra, these came from the Islamic world and transformed European navigation and mathematics. In an alternate timeline with less linguistic and cultural diversity, this kind of cross-cultural exchange is rarer. Knowledge still spreads, of course, but there's less of the creative friction that comes from encountering radically different perspectives. On the other hand, the free flow of information in a unified linguistic world might compensate for this. In our world, knowledge is often siloed within linguistic communities. A discovery made in one language might take years or even decades to reach scholars working in another language. In the alternate timeline, this barrier doesn't exist. Knowledge spreads more quickly and evenly, allowing for more efficient collaboration and cumulative progress. Which effect is stronger? Does diversity drive more innovation or does unity? There's no easy answer. It probably depends on the specific context, the specific challenge being addressed. But one thing seems clear: the alternate timeline would be characterized by a different kind of progress. Perhaps less revolutionary, less marked by sudden breakthroughs, but more steady, more cumulative. Knowledge would build layer upon layer like the bricks of the tower itself. Religion in a unified world. Let's turn now to religion because it's one of the most profound ways that culture shapes human life. In our world, religious diversity is vast. There are thousands of different religions and religious traditions, each with its own beliefs, practices, and sacred texts. This diversity has been a source of both richness and conflict. On one hand, different religious traditions offer different insights into the nature of the divine, the meaning of life, and the path to salvation or enlightenment. On the other hand, religious differences have been a source of misunderstanding, persecution, and war. In the alternate timeline, with less linguistic and cultural diversity, religious diversity might also be reduced. Perhaps there's one dominant religious tradition, shaped by the shared language and cultural history of the tower builders. Or perhaps there are a few major traditions, but they're more closely related, more mutually intelligible than the religions of our world. This could have both positive and negative effects. On the positive side, a more unified religious tradition might foster a stronger sense of shared values and common purpose. People might feel more connected to each other, more inclined to cooperate, because they see each other as part of the same spiritual community. On the negative side, religious unity can also lead to intolerance. When everyone shares the same religious beliefs, dissent becomes heresy. Those who question or reject the dominant tradition might face persecution. And without the check of competing traditions, religious authorities might accumulate unchecked power. In our world, religious pluralism, the coexistence of multiple religious traditions, has often been messy and difficult, but it's also been a source of dynamism and self-reflection. When people encounter different religious traditions, they're forced to think more deeply about their own beliefs, to justify them, to consider alternatives. In the alternate timeline, this kind of religious pluralism might be less common. The dominant tradition might be so deeply entrenched, so much a part of the cultural fabric, that alternatives are barely conceivable. But here's an interesting possibility. Perhaps in the alternate timeline, religion itself plays a different role. In our world, religion has often served as a marker of identity, a way of distinguishing us from them. But in a world where linguistic and cultural boundaries are less pronounced, religion might be less about identity and more about genuine spiritual inquiry. Without the pressure to define oneself against others, people might feel freer to explore religious questions in a more open, more individual way. The dominant tradition might be more flexible, more accommodating of different interpretations and practices. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the dominant tradition would be rigid and dogmatic, precisely because it lacks the competition of alternative traditions. It's hard to say. What we can say is that religion in the alternate timeline would be deeply intertwined with the tower itself. The tower, as the great communal project that defined the civilization, would likely have profound religious significance. It might be seen as a link between heaven and earth, a place where the divine and the human meet. Pilgrims might travel from far and wide to climb the tower, to stand at its summit and feel closer to the gods. Rituals performed at the tower might be the most sacred, the most important in the religious calendar. And the stories told about the tower, its construction, its meaning, its purpose, would be central to the religious mythology. In a sense, the tower would be both a physical structure and a sacred text, a testament to humanity's relationship with the divine. What we might have lost. As we imagine this alternate timeline, it's tempting to focus on what might have been gained: unity, stability, continuity. But it's equally important to think about what might have been lost. In our world, linguistic and cultural diversity has been a source of incredible richness. Different languages encode different ways of seeing the world. Different cultures have different values, different art forms, different ways of organizing society. This diversity is beautiful in itself, but it's also functional. It allows humanity as a whole to explore a wider range of possibilities, to try different experiments, to learn from both successes and failures. When a language dies, we lose not just a set of words, but a unique perspective on reality. When a culture is lost, we lose a repository of knowledge, wisdom, and creativity accumulated over generations. In the alternate timeline, much of this diversity might never have emerged in the first place. With a unified language and a strong sense of cultural continuity, the branching, diverging process that has characterized human history in our world might have been greatly reduced. We might have lost the incredible variety of mythologies that exist in our world. The Norse sagas, the Hindu epics, the stories of the Aboriginal Australians, each one a unique window into the human imagination. We might have lost the diversity of music, the rhythms of African drumming, the melodies of Irish folk songs, the complex harmonies of Bulgarian choral music, each one shaped by the linguistic and cultural context in which it arose. We might have lost the diversity of social organization, the egalitarian societies of some hunter-gatherer groups, the complex kinship systems of many indigenous cultures, the democratic experiments of ancient Greece and Rome, each one an attempt to answer the question of how people should live together. In short, we might have lost much of what makes humanity interesting, creative, and resilient. But we also might have gained something: a deeper sense of connection, a more stable, more peaceful world. A civilization characterized by patience, continuity, and cooperation rather than conflict, disruption, and competition. Which is better? Again, there's no easy answer. Both timelines have their merits and their drawbacks. The alternate timeline we've imagined is not a utopia, but neither is it a dystopia. It's simply different. And perhaps that's the most important lesson. That the world we inhabit, with all its diversity, its conflict, its chaos, is not inevitable. It's the result of countless choices, countless accidents, countless moments when things could have gone differently. The Tower of Babel, whether we interpret it as history or myth, represents one of those moments. A moment when humanity's linguistic unity was shattered, and the world as we know it began to emerge. But it didn't have to happen that way. And imagining how things might have been different helps us appreciate what we have, and think more carefully about what we want to preserve. The tower in memory. As we near the end of our journey, let's return to the tower itself. In the alternate timeline, centuries or even millennia have passed since its completion. The civilization that built it may have changed beyond recognition. Empires may have risen and fallen. Technologies may have advanced. But the tower remains. Over time, it becomes more than just a building. It becomes a symbol, a myth, a sacred site. People come from all over to see it, to touch its ancient bricks, to climb its worn steps. Some come as pilgrims seeking spiritual connection. Some come as tourists, curious about this relic of the ancient world. Some come as scholars, studying its construction, its history, its meaning. The tower is maintained, of course. In our world, ancient structures require constant upkeep to prevent them from crumbling. The same is true in the alternate timeline. Teams of workers, carrying on a tradition that stretches back to the original builders, repair damaged bricks, reinforce weak sections, clear debris. But they work with reverence. They understand that the tower is not just a structure but a link to the past. Every brick they replace, every crack they fill, is a way of honoring the labor of those who came before. Stories about the tower abound. Some are historical, based on written records or oral traditions passed down through generations. Others are legendary, embellished and mythologized over time. People tell of the tower's miraculous construction, of the unity and cooperation that made it possible, of the gods who blessed the project. Some stories focus on individual builders, men and women whose skill or dedication set them apart. Others focus on dramatic moments, a storm that threatened to topple the half-built structure, a fire that destroyed months of work, a dispute among workers that was resolved through wisdom and compromise. These stories serve a purpose. They're not just entertainment. They're a way of transmitting values, of teaching lessons, of binding the community together. When a child hears the story of the tower, they're learning about patience, cooperation, and the importance of working toward goals that extend beyond a single lifetime. In this way, the tower continues to shape the culture, even long after its completion. It's a constant reminder of what's possible when people work together, when they're patient, when they're willing to contribute to something larger than themselves. But the tower also raises questions. Why was it built? What was its purpose? And now that it's complete, what should be done with it? Different people have different answers. Some see it as a monument to human achievement, a symbol of pride. Others see it as a place of worship, a link between earth and heaven. Still others see it as a warning, a reminder of the dangers of ambition. And perhaps all of these interpretations are valid. Perhaps the tower's meaning is not fixed, but changes with each generation, each individual who encounters it. Perhaps that's the nature of all great symbols. They're rich enough, complex enough to support multiple meanings. A quieter world. As we imagine the modern world in this alternate timeline, one quality stands out. It's quieter. Not quieter in the sense of less noise. Cities are still bustling, markets are still loud, life is still full of sound and activity. But quieter in a deeper sense. There's less chaos, less disruption, less of the constant churn that characterizes our world. Change happens more slowly. Traditions are respected. People feel rooted in their communities, connected to their ancestors, confident in their understanding of how the world works. There's a peacefulness to this, a sense of stability and continuity that many people in our world crave. In our modern era, change happens so quickly that it's hard to keep up. Technologies become obsolete within years. Jobs that once seemed secure disappear. Communities are disrupted by economic forces beyond their control. In the alternate timeline, life is more predictable. You can expect that the world your children grow up in will be similar to the world you grew up in. The same language, the same traditions, the same values. There's comfort in that. But there's also a potential for stagnation. Without the constant pressure to adapt and innovate, progress slows. Problems that might have been solved through creative thinking or new technologies persist for longer. And when change does come, it's often resisted, seen as a threat to the established order. In our world, diversity, linguistic, cultural, ideological, creates friction. And friction can be uncomfortable. It leads to misunderstandings, conflicts, and difficult conversations. But friction also generates heat, and heat is necessary for transformation. In the alternate timeline with less diversity, there's less friction. Life runs more smoothly but also more predictably. There are fewer surprises, fewer breakthroughs, fewer moments when everything changes. Is this better or worse? It depends on what you value. If you value stability, continuity, and a strong sense of community, the alternate timeline might seem appealing. If you value innovation, diversity, and individual freedom, our timeline, chaotic as it is, might seem preferable. But perhaps the most honest answer is that both timelines have their merits and their flaws. Both offer opportunities and impose costs. And the choice between them is not really a choice we can make because we can't go back and change history. All we can do is understand the trade-offs, appreciate what we have, and think carefully about what kind of future we want to create. The final question. And so we arrive at the question that's been hovering at the edge of our thoughts throughout this journey. If humanity had never fragmented its voice, if the Tower of Babel had been completed and we all still spoke one language, would the world feel louder or more quiet? It's a strange question, isn't it? Almost paradoxical. On one hand, a unified language might seem louder, more voices speaking in unison, more harmony, less cacophony. On the other hand, it might seem quieter, less diversity of expression, fewer competing narratives, less of the vibrant, chaotic chorus that characterizes our world. Perhaps the answer is that it would be both, and neither. Louder because everyone would be part of the same conversation. There would be no language barriers, no translation needed. When someone speaks, everyone can understand. Ideas spread more easily. Stories reach farther. The human voice, in a sense, would be amplified, but also quieter because there would be fewer voices, or rather, fewer distinct voices. In our world, each language is a unique instrument, with its own rhythms, its own melodies, its own way of making meaning. The sum total of human expression is like a vast orchestra, with thousands of instruments playing different parts. In the alternate timeline, that orchestra would be smaller, perhaps more harmonious, but also less rich, less complex. And yet, perhaps the metaphor of loudness and quietness isn't quite right. Perhaps what we're really talking about is depth. In our world, with its thousands of languages and cultures, human experience has breadth. We explore a vast range of possibilities, try countless experiments, approach the same questions from countless angles. But sometimes this breadth comes at the cost of depth. We skim the surface of many things without fully understanding any of them. In the alternate timeline, with its unified language and stable traditions, human experience might have more depth. Instead of exploring many different paths, we follow one path very far, going deeper and deeper, generation after generation. Which is better? Breadth or depth? Diversity or continuity? The chorus or the solo? There's no right answer. And that's okay. Because the point of this thought experiment was never to determine which timeline is superior. It was simply to explore the possibilities, to imagine how things might have been different, and in doing so, to better understand the world we actually inhabit. The Tower of Babel, whether we understand it as literal history or as metaphor, represents a moment of divergence. A moment when humanity split into many voices, many languages, many cultures. And that divergence has shaped everything that came after. But it didn't have to happen that way. And imagining the alternative, a world where the tower was completed, where unity was preserved, helps us see our own world more clearly. We see the beauty of our diversity, the richness of our many languages and cultures. But we also see the cost, the misunderstandings, the conflicts, the difficulty of communication. And perhaps in the end that's the lesson. That both unity and diversity have value. That the ideal might be some balance between the two. Enough unity to allow for cooperation and understanding, but enough diversity to preserve creativity and resilience. Our world, for all its chaos and conflict, achieves a kind of balance. Not a perfect balance, but a living one, constantly shifting, constantly adapting. And the Tower of Babel, standing in our imagination if not in reality, reminds us of what's at stake. Reminds us to value both our common humanity and our beautiful differences. Closing thoughts. As our journey comes to an end, let's take one last look at the tower. In our imagination we can see it, a massive structure of brick and bitumen, rising from the plains of ancient Mesopotamia, reaching toward the sky. In one timeline, our timeline, it was never finished. Language fractured, people scattered, and the tower became a ruin, a symbol of human hubris and divine intervention. In another timeline, the one we've been imagining together, it was completed. Slowly, patiently, over centuries. And it stands still, a testament to human cooperation, continuity, and shared purpose. Which timeline is real? Well, that depends on how you define reality. In the literal sense, we live in the first timeline. The Tower of Babel, if it existed at all, was never completed. Linguistic diversity is a fact of our world. But in another sense, both timelines are real. Because they both exist in our imagination, in our stories, in the way we think about who we are and how we got here. And imagination, as we've seen, has power. It shapes how we understand the past, how we navigate the present, and how we envision the future. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can hold both timelines in your mind. The world of diversity and the world of unity. The world of many voices and the world of one. Neither better nor worse, just different. And perhaps you can ask yourself, in my own life, how do I balance unity and diversity? Cooperation and individuality? Tradition and innovation? These are not easy questions, but they're worth pondering. Because in the end, the story of the Tower of Babel is not just about an ancient structure or a mythical moment in history. It's about us, about the choices we make, the values we hold, the kind of world we want to create. And with that thought, I'll leave you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you'd like more content like this, please subscribe. And let me know in the comments what you think. Would you want to live in a world where the Tower of Babel was completed? Or do you prefer the chaotic, diverse, beautiful mess of our actual world? There's no wrong answer. Just something to think about as you drift off to sleep. Sweet dreams. And may your thoughts be as peaceful as a brick drying in the sun, as steady as a tower rising slowly toward the sky, as quiet as the moment when the final stone is laid and the work is done. Good night.